Maria stood in the back of the crowded community center, trying her best to blend into the wall, even though she worked there as a cleaner. She always stayed quiet during events because she never wanted attention. That day, a world-famous pianist, Adrian Keller, was visiting for a charity program. People were excited to see him. Some came just to take pictures. Others came hoping he would play a song for them. The room buzzed with energy. And Maria stood there holding a tray of water cups, watching everything with calm eyes. She never imagined that this ordinary day would change her entire life. Adrian walked in confidently, wearing a stylish suit and sunglasses even though they were indoors. He loved the feeling of being admired. People surrounded him asking for autographs, taking selfies, praising his music. He enjoyed every second after greeting everyone. He walked toward the piano placed in the center of the hall. It was an old piano, the paint fading, but it still produced soft, beautiful notes. Maria often cleaned it carefully, because she respected instruments even though no one knew she once played beautifully when she was younger. As Adrian approached the piano, he suddenly noticed Maria standing quietly at the back. She wore simple clothes, a plain shirt, and her hair was tied in a loose bun. Her shoes looked worn out. To him, she looked like someone who had never touched a musical instrument before. He didn't recognize her face, so he assumed she was nobody important. A small grin appeared on his face, the type people get when they plan a harmless joke. He turned to the crowd and loudly said, "You there. Why don't you come play something for us?" He pointed directly at Maria. Everyone turned to look at her, and a few people laughed softly. Some whispered. Thinking Adrian was making fun of her, Maria's heart jumped in her chest. She froze on the spot, unsure what to say. Her cheeks turned red as dozens of eyes stared at her. Adrian laughed lightly as if expecting her to refuse. He thought it would be funny to see her panic. The crowd waited, curious to see what she would do. Maria placed the tray of cups on a nearby table. Her hands shaking slightly. She had not played a piano in years. Not because she didn't want to, but because life had forced her into hard work, long shifts, and responsibilities she never expected. Music was once her dream, but dreams were fragile, and hers had broken quietly over time. Now a famous pianist was calling her out as a joke. The unfairness of it hurt, but she stayed calm. She walked slowly toward the piano, each step feeling heavier than the last. The crowd went quiet, some smirking, some confused, and some simply waiting for the embarrassing moment they believed was coming. Adrian leaned back casually, crossing his arms. Confident that this would be amusing, he didn't think she would dare sit at the piano. But Maria surprised everyone. She pulled out the bench gently, settled onto it, and stared down at the keys. For a moment the world felt still, her breath slow, her fingers hovering above the instrument she once loved deeply. Her mind filled with memories, late nights practicing when she was a child, the smell of old sheet music, the warm smile of her music teacher who once told her she had a gift. She remembered winning a small competition in school, remembered the joy she used to feel playing melodies that came from her heart. All those memories had been locked away for years. But now, sitting there, they returned like a forgotten whisper. The crowd continued to watch her in stunned silence. Adrian gave a small laugh, thinking she was only pretending for attention. He leaned toward his assistant and said softly, "This will be interesting," believing she would press the wrong keys and make everyone laugh. But Maria didn't hear him. She was too focused, trying to calm the nervous energy in her chest. She placed her right hand gently on the keys, the cool surface familiar yet distant. She pressed one note, just a soft single note. It echoed through the hall, surprisingly warm and steady. The crowd fell even more silent. Maria felt her heartbeat slow down. Something inside her began to wake up, a part of her she thought was gone forever. She lowered her left hand and touched another key, then another, forming a slow, gentle tune. The notes fit together naturally. Like her fingers remembered the path even though her mind had forgotten. Whispers stopped completely. Feet stopped moving. Even Adrian straightened his posture, confused by the clean sound she produced. Maria wasn't pretending. She wasn't panicking. She wasn't randomly pressing keys. She was playing with a control and softness that surprised even her. The room felt different, the air heavier but warmer, like everyone had unknowingly stepped into a moment that mattered. Maria didn't dare look up. She didn't want to see the faces around her. She played from memory, from emotion, from that small corner of her heart where music still lived. She let the melody flow naturally, each note connecting to the next. As if her hands had a mind of their own, she didn't try to impress anyone. She simply let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years. The joke that was supposed to embarrass her was now turning into something else. Something no one expected. Adrian felt the shift first. A strange tension rising inside him. He leaned forward, studying her hands. Suddenly unsure if this was the same woman he had mocked seconds ago, and everyone else stood frozen, realizing they were witnessing the beginning of a moment they would never forget. Maria's quiet strength, her hidden talent, and her courage to step forward had changed the room completely. And the joke was no longer funny, even to the man who started it. Maria kept playing the soft melody, but inside her heart something heavy was moving. She felt fear and hope mixing together in a strange way. Her fingers knew the keys, but her mind kept reminding her that everyone was watching. She had not played in front of people for many years, and she had never imagined her return to music would happen because a famous pianist mocked her. Still, the moment she touched the piano, it felt like something she lost long ago was slowly returning to her. The hall remained silent, but the silence was not calm. It felt thick, like everyone was holding their breath. People who had expected her to fail suddenly leaned forward, trying to understand what was happening. A few whispered quietly, but most were too surprised to make any sound. Maria's simple clothes, her shy nature, her small presence, none of that matched the way she played the piano. The sound was too clean, too controlled, too emotional for someone who looked like she barely belonged in the room. Maria's hands trembled for a moment, fear rising again. She worried she might forget the notes or hit a wrong key. She knew the crowd was waiting. And she knew Adrian Keller, the world-famous pianist, was watching her very closely. The thought made her throat tighten. She almost stopped playing, but then she closed her eyes, letting the music guide her instead of her fear. Her breathing slowed, her shoulders relaxed, and the melody continued, even stronger than before. Adrian watched her with narrowed eyes. He had expected a funny moment, something he could laugh about later with his assistants. But now his smile was gone. He leaned forward slightly, trying to hear each detail of her playing. It felt strange to him. The way she moved her fingers was not something a beginner would know. There was confidence in her wrist, softness in her touch, and familiarity in her style. He could tell she had real training once, maybe even talent beyond what most people could ever reach. The people around Adrian also noticed the change. His assistant whispered, "She's good," but the words didn't do justice to what Maria was doing. Her music filled the room in a way that made everyone forget they were supposed to be laughing at her. Instead, they were slowly becoming her audience, drawn into an unexpected performance that touched something in their hearts. Maria, however, didn't see any of this. Her focus was tight. Her world had shrunk to the small space between her fingertips and the keys. She remembered the days when she used to practice after school, when she believed she would one day become a pianist. But those dreams had faded over time, crushed under responsibilities, bills, and the reality of life. She had given up music, telling herself it was childish to believe she could ever stand on a real stage. She had convinced herself she wasn't good enough. So she stopped playing, yet here she was, surrounded by people. And instead of laughing, they were listening. The fear inside her slowly changed shape. It became something lighter. Something that felt a little like strength. She allowed her fingers to move freely, feeling an old confidence rising from a place she thought was dead. Every note she played made her believe a little more in herself. Even though she wasn't sure why, a woman in the front row wiped her eyes. Surprised by the emotion in the music, another man who had laughed earlier now stared at Maria in disbelief. Whispers traveled across the room, but they weren't mocking anymore. They were full of shock, curiosity, and admiration. Maria didn't notice any of this, she just played. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about work, or money, or the heavy weight of life. She was thinking only about the music. Adrian shifted uncomfortably. He didn't enjoy being wrong, especially in public, and especially about music. He studied her hands more carefully. He recognized small techniques that only trained pianists used. Details like the gentle lift of her fingers, the control in her rhythm, the way she didn't panic at the higher notes. She wasn't perfect. He could see moments where her confidence cracked, moments where her fingers hesitated, tiny mistakes that showed she was rusty. But even with those imperfections, she played better than most people he had taught. His pride began to burn, but underneath that pride, something else grew, respect. He didn't want to admit it, but he could feel it forming inside him. The simple woman he had mocked was not only talented, she had something rare, something he couldn't describe easily, something that only true musicians carried deep inside. He felt suddenly foolish for making her the target of his joke. Maria continued her melody, each note helping her feel more alive. But her thoughts were still filled with fear. She kept thinking, what if I mess up? What if everyone starts laughing again? What if Adrian thinks I'm pretending? She wanted to stop, but she couldn't. The music wouldn't let her. Her heart poured into the keys, telling a story even she didn't fully understand. A story of lost dreams, hidden pain, and a small bit of courage she didn't know she still had. The room grew warmer, quieter, and more intense. People who came to admire Adrian now found their eyes locked on Maria. Even children stopped moving, even phones were lowered. Something inside the hall had shifted completely, and no one could deny it. Maria wasn't just playing a tune. She was changing the atmosphere of the entire room. Adrian felt it too, though he didn't know what to say. He had accidentally awakened something powerful, something he could not control, and now all he could do was watch. Maria's fear was still there, but it was no longer controlling her. Instead, it was dancing with her hope, pushing her forward, guiding her hands, and reminding her that she was more than the life she had been forced into. She didn't know why or how this moment was happening. She didn't know what would come next. But she kept playing, because somewhere deep inside, she finally felt seen again. Maria kept her eyes closed as the melody grew fuller. She didn't even notice how confidently her hands were moving now. The soft trembling in her fingers had faded, replaced by a strange calm she had not felt in years. The music felt like it belonged to her again, like it had been waiting inside her this whole time. The notes flowed smoothly, rising and falling with emotion, and every second pulled the room deeper into silence. People began to exchange confused looks. They had come expecting a charity program, not a surprise performance from a woman they barely noticed before. Even the children in the crowd were still, watching her with wide eyes. The earlier whispers had disappeared completely, replaced by quiet awe. Maria didn't know she had captured the entire room, but she could feel something shifting, like her music was touching people in a way she never imagined. Adrian Keller sat straighter in his seat. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The simple woman he thought he could laugh at was now controlling the atmosphere better than some trained performers he had worked with. He studied her hands closely, noticing how her technique blended old training with raw emotion. She wasn't flawless, but she played with heart. And that was something even he struggled to teach his students. He felt his ego take a painful hit, but he also felt something rare inside him: curiosity. Maria's mind drifted back to her childhood again. She remembered practicing on a second-hand keyboard her mother bought. She remembered sitting by the window listening to rain and trying to match its rhythm on the keys. She remembered how happy she used to be when she played, before life became heavy. Before responsibility pulled her away from everything she loved. Those memories made her chest tighten. But they also filled her with quiet strength, reminding her of who she used to be. Her music started growing more emotional, the melody changing naturally as her feelings shifted. It was no longer only soft, it carried a gentle sadness, a longing that she had buried for years. People felt it too, even if they didn't understand why. They felt the ache in the song, the story it was telling without words. And for a moment, everyone forgot they were in a community center. It felt like they were inside her memories. Inside her heart, Adrian's assistant whispered, "She's incredible," but Adrian couldn't answer. He was too focused, too shocked to form words. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, watching her like she was a rare phenomenon. He recognized techniques she probably didn't even know she was using. He heard the musical intelligence hidden behind her rusty edges. Her playing wasn't polished, but it was powerful. And that power came from a place that couldn't be faked. Maria still didn't dare open her eyes. She felt afraid that if she looked up, the crowd's reactions might break her concentration. She feared seeing people laugh or smirk. Her mind still carried old wounds, old insecurities. But her hands kept moving, refusing to stop. Because for the first time in forever, she felt alive. She felt like she was doing something that truly belonged to her. Not to her job, not to her responsibilities, but to her soul. The room seemed to breathe with her music, the air thick with emotion. Some people even held their hands over their hearts without realizing. Others leaned against the walls slowly. Drawn into the moment, one older woman whispered, "She's playing her life," and others nodded softly. Because it did feel like that, like Maria wasn't just playing notes. She was telling a story of quiet suffering, hidden dreams, and unexpected courage. Meanwhile, Adrian struggled to understand how he missed someone like her. He wondered why she worked as a cleaner, why no one knew she had such talent. He wondered what she could have become if life had given her even a small chance. He felt a pang of guilt in his chest, remembering how he had initiated this. Not out of kindness, but out of mockery. Now his joke was transforming in front of him, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. Maria's melody reached a gentle high point, her fingers gliding across the keys with unexpected grace. She didn't think about mistakes anymore. She didn't think about people watching. She didn't even think about Adrian's mocking smile. She thought only about the sound, the feeling, the emotion pouring through her hands. She felt like she had stepped into a forgotten part of herself, a part she thought was lost forever. Then, slowly, she let the melody soften again, letting it drift like a whisper fading into the air. Her hands relaxed, the final notes trembling slightly as she held them. The sound hovered in the room like a fragile memory. And for several long seconds, no one dared to breathe. The ending felt like a question, a quiet request for the world to see her differently, and without meaning to. Maria had set the stage for a moment that would change her life completely. The last soft notes slowly faded into the air, and for a moment, the entire hall stayed frozen. Maria kept her hands resting lightly on the keys, afraid to move, afraid to open her eyes. She didn't know what she had just done. She didn't know if people were angry, confused, or shocked. But the silence around her felt heavy, like the whole room was holding its breath with her. Finally, she opened her eyes slowly, her heart racing. She expected laughter or a mocking smile. She expected Adrian to stand up and say something dismissive. She expected people to whisper about how she tried too hard. But instead she saw something she never imagined. Everyone was staring at her without blinking. Their faces filled with surprise, awe, and deep emotion. It felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life. Maria quickly looked down again, her face burning with embarrassment. She whispered a small apology as if she had done something wrong, but no one moved, no one responded. The silence was not mocking, it was stunned, almost respectful. The woman in the front row wiped a tear from her eye, and a man near the door slowly put his phone down. Unable to look away from Maria, Adrian Keller stood up slowly, his eyes still fixed on her. He wasn't sure how to react. He had expected a joke, a moment of humor to entertain the crowd. But what he witnessed was something powerful, something emotional, something he did not see often. He felt frustration, admiration, confusion, and guilt all at once. His pride didn't want to admit that she had moved the entire room more than he could with one simple melody. Maria felt her hands shaking again. This time from fear and confusion, she whispered, "I'm sorry if it wasn't good," her voice barely audible. Some people gasped softly at her words, because they couldn't believe she didn't know how incredible she had sounded. One woman stepped forward slightly and said in a trembling voice, "That was beautiful," but Maria thought she misheard her and lowered her head even more. Adrian walked closer, each step measured and slow. The crowd parted for him like water, their eyes switching between him and Maria. He stopped beside the piano, looking down at her with an expression no one could read. Maria felt smaller than ever. She wished she could disappear into the floor. She wanted to stand up and run back to the corner of the room where she belonged. But her body refused to move. Adrian cleared his throat, but his voice didn't come out immediately. He wasn't used to feeling uncertain. He wasn't used to being wrong. He looked at her hands, noticing the slight tremble. He noticed the worn-out skin on her fingertips, signs of someone who worked hard, someone who didn't get the luxury of practicing on grand pianos. He wondered how long it had been since she last played seriously. The crowd waited for him to speak, expecting him to explain what had just happened, expecting him to joke again. But something in his expression was different now. He wasn't mocking her anymore. In fact, he felt ashamed, forever thinking she was someone he could easily laugh at. Maria lifted her eyes slowly, unsure what she would see on his face. For a moment their eyes met, and Maria felt her heart stop. Adrian was not smirking. He was not amused. He looked almost humbled. He said softly, "Where did you learn to play like that?" His voice was quiet, not demanding, not joking, just genuinely curious. Maria's breath caught. She didn't know how to answer. She had never been asked such a question by someone important. She replied with a shaky voice, "I used to learn when I was younger." She didn't say anything more. She didn't want to talk about the painful years when she had to abandon music completely. She didn't want to talk about the dreams she had buried to survive. But Adrian already understood there was more to her story than she was letting out. Before anyone could say anything else, a small clap echoed from the back of the room. It was hesitant at first, then another clap joined, then more. Soon the entire hall erupted into applause, loud, sincere, thunderous applause that filled the room until the walls seemed to vibrate. Maria looked around in shock, unable to believe people were clapping for her. Her eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. Adrian looked at the crowd applauding the woman he once tried to mock, and he felt the weight of his mistake settle deep inside him. He turned back to her and said even more softly, "You have something rare," and Maria didn't know how to respond. Her heart shaking, her mind overwhelmed. She had walked to the piano expecting humiliation, and instead she had changed the entire atmosphere of the room. She didn't know it yet. But this moment, this applause, this recognition, this unexpected awakening, was only the beginning of something much bigger than she ever imagined. Maria sat frozen on the piano bench while the applause continued around her. She didn't know where to look. She didn't know how to breathe. She had never received this kind of attention in her whole life. The sound of people clapping felt unreal, like she was dreaming with her eyes open. She kept thinking they must be clapping for someone else, not her. Not a simple woman who swept floors and served water cups. Adrian stood beside her, his expression serious and thoughtful. He was still processing everything he had just witnessed. He had seen talented musicians before, students, performers, even prodigies. But Maria's playing had something different, something raw and emotional. Something that could not be taught in any expensive academy. He felt a mixture of admiration and guilt swirling inside him. Admiration for her hidden talent. Guilt because he had treated her like a joke at the beginning. Maria finally stood up slowly, her legs weak. She kept her head low. She felt shy and nervous because she wasn't used to being in the center of attention. The applause slowly softened, but people continued staring at her as if she had done something unbelievable. Some smiled warmly, others wiped their eyes. A few whispered to each other about how they had never heard such natural emotion in a simple community center. One woman stepped forward and said, "You touched my heart," and Maria felt her cheeks heat up with embarrassment. She whispered a thank you, but her voice was too soft to hear. She didn't know how to handle compliments. She had lived too long believing she wasn't special, that she wasn't worth noticing. So hearing praise now felt overwhelming, almost confusing. Adrian took a small step closer to her and asked gently, "Why did you stop playing?" The question hit her like a soft ache. She wanted to answer honestly, but so much pain was tied to that story. Memories she didn't want to open in front of strangers. She swallowed hard and said, "Life got in the way," her voice trembling. And Adrian understood there was a deeper story behind her simple words. He studied her face carefully, trying to read the emotion she was trying to hide. He could feel there was sadness, lost dreams, and maybe even regret. He realized he had been wrong about her from the very beginning. He had judged her based on her appearance and her quiet presence, not knowing she carried a gift inside her that even he would struggle to match emotionally. The crowd began to move again, finally breaking out of their stunned stillness. Some people approached her to thank her, some asked if she had ever taken lessons. Some simply stood near her, hoping she would say something. Maria felt overwhelmed. She didn't know what to say. She kept repeating polite little smiles or quiet nods. Hoping the attention would fade soon, Adrian watched her closely. Noticing how uncomfortable she looked, she wasn't used to praise. She wasn't used to people caring about her. She was used to being invisible, someone who blended into the background. Someone people walked past without noticing. Now the entire room was staring at her like she was a miracle. And Adrian could see she didn't know how to handle it. Taking a deep breath, Adrian finally spoke up. "Maria," he said gently, using her name for the first time. She looked up at him with wide, nervous eyes. "You have something rare," he continued. "Something people spend years trying to find." She blinked in confusion. Not understanding what he meant, she whispered, "I'm not special." But Adrian shook his head immediately. "You are," he said firmly. "More than you realize." Those words made Maria's throat tighten. She didn't know why. But hearing someone like Adrian say that awakened a small pain inside her. A pain that came from years of hiding her talent. Years of letting her dreams fade. Years of believing she wasn't good enough. She wanted to tell him that her life had no room for music anymore. That she was too late, too old, too tired. But before she could speak, Adrian turned to the crowd and lifted his hand. Signaling for silence, everyone quieted down quickly, their attention returning to him. Adrian took a step toward the piano and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we just discovered someone extraordinary today," the audience murmured. Some nodding excitedly. Maria felt panic rise inside her. She didn't want a spotlight. She didn't want expectations. She was afraid of where this moment could lead. Adrian then looked back at her and said softly but clearly, "Maria, you should be on a real stage," and those words hit her harder than anything else that day. She gasped slightly, shaking her head without thinking. She whispered, "No, I can't," but Adrian only smiled gently, as if he already knew that the real story was only just beginning. Maria stood frozen as Adrian's words echoed in her mind. She should be on a real stage. The sentence felt impossible. Unbelievable, almost frightening. She stared at him, unsure if he was serious or simply trying to be kind after embarrassing her earlier. Her heart pounded loudly in her chest. She wanted to step back, but her feet wouldn't move. Her thoughts were spinning too fast. The crowd waited for her to respond, whispering quietly among themselves, some nodding in agreement, some looking excited for her. But Maria felt nothing except fear mixed with a strange tiny spark of hope she didn't want to acknowledge. She whispered, "I am not good enough," her voice trembling, as if she was confessing a secret. She truly believed she didn't deserve anything more than the life she already lived. Adrian shook his head gently. He could clearly see how scared she was. But he also saw the talent she didn't see in herself. He said softly, "You don't understand what you did just now." Maria frowned in confusion. Unsure what he meant, Adrian continued, "You moved everyone in this room. Not many performers can do that. Not even professionals." His voice was calm, honest, without any hint of mockery. Maria's breathing grew uneven. She didn't know how to accept praise, especially praise from someone like him. She kept looking down at her hands, as if they belonged to someone else, not her. Not the person who had been sweeping floors a few hours earlier. She whispered, "It was nothing." But Adrian stepped closer and said firmly, "It was everything." Hearing that made her throat tighten. She felt tears gathering in her eyes, but she blinked rapidly, trying to hide them. She didn't want anyone to see her cry. She was already embarrassed enough. But the emotions of the moment were too heavy, too unexpected. She felt like her heart was being pulled in two different directions. One direction telling her to hide, stay invisible, stay safe, and the other direction whispering that maybe, just maybe, she was worth more. The applause had ended, but the energy in the room still surrounded her. People kept looking at her with respect, admiration, even gratitude. It made her feel small and big at the same time. She didn't know how to stand under this sudden spotlight. She felt exposed, like they could all see her hidden wounds, her struggles, her past failures. Adrian took a breath and asked gently, "When was the last time you played like this?" Maria swallowed hard. Thinking back, she said quietly, "Years ago. Before my mother got sick. Before I had to work full-time." Her voice cracked slightly as old memories surfaced. She remembered the nights practicing on her small keyboard, the dreams she used to have, the competitions she once hoped to join, all forgotten when life forced her into survival mode. Adrian listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He sensed her pain, the kind that comes from losing something you love because you had no choice. He said softly, "You didn't stop because you weren't good. You stopped because life made you choose." Maria looked up with surprised eyes, because he understood her without her needing to explain. For a moment, Maria felt something warm rise inside her chest. A small feeling she hadn't felt in years. The feeling of being seen, truly seen, not as a cleaner, not as a simple woman, but as someone with a gift. Someone with a story, someone with a soul. She wiped a tear quickly before it fell, embarrassed but unable to stop herself. Adrian glanced at the piano again and said, "I've trained many people, but I haven't seen someone play with your heart in a long time." Maria's breath trembled. She didn't know how to accept such words. She felt like she didn't deserve them. She had lived too many years believing she wasn't special, that her dreams didn't matter, but now someone important was telling her otherwise. And it hurt because she didn't know how to believe it. People around them slowly returned to their seats, as if sensing something private was unfolding between Maria and Adrian. The room softened, the noise quieted, leaving only the echo of her performance lingering in the air. Maria stepped back a little, needing space to breathe. But Adrian didn't let the moment fade. He gently said, "Maria, I want to help you." She looked at him with fear and confusion. "Help me," she repeated. Uncertain what he meant, he nodded and said, "You deserve a chance to play again." "A real chance." Maria shook her head quickly, panicking. "I can't. I'm not ready. I'm not like those people on stage." Her words spilled out uncontrollably, her fear louder than her hope. But Adrian didn't back down. He said softly, "You don't have to be like anyone else," his voice steady. "Your music is yours. That's what makes it special." Maria's eyes filled with tears again. Because deep inside she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she wasn't too late. She wasn't too broken. She wasn't too ordinary to dream again. And she didn't know it yet, but Adrian wasn't offering empty comfort. He was making a decision that would soon change her life in a way she never imagined. Maria felt her knees weaken as Adrian told her he wanted to help her. The words kept echoing in her mind. She wasn't sure if she heard him correctly. Help was not something she was used to receiving. She had spent most of her life solving problems alone, hiding her dreams, forgetting her passions. So hearing someone like Adrian speak with such sincerity left her confused and scared. She stepped back slightly, shaking her head. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered, her voice small. Adrian remained calm, watching her with a gentle seriousness. He knew she was overwhelmed. Anyone would be after what happened. He didn't push her. He waited for her breathing to steady a little before speaking again. "I want you to play with me," he said, his words careful but strong. The crowd gasped softly. No one expected this. Maria froze instantly. She felt a cold shiver run through her body. She blinked rapidly, trying to make sense of his words. Her heart was beating so fast it almost hurt. "Play with you," she repeated in disbelief. Her voice cracking, Adrian nodded. "Yes, on stage. In front of people." Maria's eyes widened in shock. She felt like her entire world tilted. She couldn't breathe for a moment. Memories of small failed dreams and years of silence pressed against her chest. She whispered, "No. No, I can't. I'm not ready. I'm not good enough." Adrian didn't argue. He took a slow breath and said, "You played with more emotion today than many professionals do after years of practice." He wasn't praising her to flatter her. He was stating a truth he had felt in every note she played. Maria felt a tear slip down her cheek. She wiped it quickly. Embarrassed, she said, "I only played because I don't know. It just happened." "That's exactly why it matters," Adrian said softly. "Real music doesn't need permission to come out. It just comes." Maria wanted to believe him. Her heart wanted to grab those words and hold them tightly. But her fear kept whispering other things, reminding her of everything she had lost, everything she had failed, everything she thought she was not. She looked around the room, hoping the attention had faded. But the audience was still watching her with warm eyes. Some smiling, some nodding as if encouraging her silently. It scared her even more. She wasn't used to being seen. She wasn't used to being valued. She felt like she would break under the weight of their expectations. Adrian saw the panic rising inside her. So he softened his voice even more. "Maria, listen," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to perform tomorrow." She looked up slowly. Confused, he continued, "I'm asking you to try. To take one step toward something you loved once." His words wrapped around her like a quiet comfort she hadn't felt in years. Maria's shoulders lowered slightly, her breathing slowing. She whispered, "But what if I fail?" The fear in her voice was clear. And Adrian shook his head softly. "Failing means you tried," he said. "But never trying means you lose before you even begin." The words struck her deeply. They reminded her of all the times she backed away from opportunities, letting fear decide her fate, letting life bury her talent deeper and deeper. She looked at the piano again, the instrument that had felt like home for a brief moment. Her fingers twitched slightly, as if they were remembering the feeling of the keys. She swallowed and whispered, "I don't know if I can do it," Adrian replied gently. "Then let me help you find out." The sincerity in his voice broke something fragile inside her. She felt more tears rising, but didn't fight them this time. A single tear rolled down her cheek, and she let it fall. The crowd stayed quiet, giving her space to breathe, giving her space to feel. She felt strangely supported by strangers she didn't even know. For the first time that day, Maria didn't immediately reject the idea. She didn't step away, she didn't say no. She simply stood there, thinking, struggling, hoping, fearing, all at the same time. She whispered, I will think about it," her voice trembling. And Adrian nodded respectfully. He didn't push her. He understood that courage was not something people gained in a second. But what Maria didn't realize was that by saying those words, "I will think about it," she had already taken her first step toward a future she never imagined she could have. A future that was quietly waiting for her, just beyond her fear. And for the first time in many years, a small fragile spark of possibility flickered inside her heart. Maria walked home that evening with her mind filled with noise. Not the kind that comes from traffic or people, but the noise inside her own thoughts. She kept replaying everything that had happened. The joke, the silence, the music, the applause. Adrian's words. It all felt unreal, like a story that belonged to someone else. Not a simple woman who barely earned enough to pay her bills. When she reached her small apartment, she set her things down and sat on the edge of her bed, her hands still tingling as if the piano keys were under her fingers. She stared at them for a long time, whispering to herself, "Can I really do this?" She thought about her mother, who used to smile proudly when she played as a child. She thought about the dream she had buried so deep that she almost forgot it existed. That night she couldn't sleep properly. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the melody she played. She saw the people watching her. She saw Adrian's serious expression when he said she belonged on a real stage. Part of her felt excited, but a bigger part felt terrified. She didn't want to be disappointed again. She didn't want to fail. She didn't want to believe in something that might break her heart. The next morning she returned to the community center for work. She tried to act normal, but people kept stopping her. They asked her how she learned to play. They told her how her music made them cry. They said she had a gift. And every compliment made her feel smaller and stronger at the same time. She didn't know how to react, so she kept giving shy little smiles and nods. Trying not to cry again, around noon, Adrian returned. He walked in quietly, not like a celebrity, but like someone with a purpose. Maria felt her stomach twist when she saw him. She didn't know what he would say. She didn't know if he changed his mind. But when he approached her, his expression was gentle. Not proud or demanding, just calm. He asked, "Did you think about what I said?" Maria looked down at her hands. She hesitated, afraid of disappointing him. Afraid of disappointing herself, she whispered, "I'm scared." It was the most honest thing she could say. Adrian nodded, understanding completely. "Fear means it matters," he said softly. "Nothing important feels easy at the beginning." Maria felt her chest tighten. His words felt like they were reaching a place inside her she had ignored for too long. He didn't pressure her. He didn't tell her what to do. Instead, he reached into his bag and handed her a small folded paper. She opened it slowly, confused at first, then shocked. It was an invitation to perform a short piece at a charity concert he was organizing in a month. It wasn't a huge stage, but it was a real stage with real lights, real instruments, real people. Her hands shook as she held the paper. She whispered, "I don't deserve this," and Adrian shook his head. "You earned this the moment you touched the piano," he said. "You just forgot how good you are." Maria felt tears rise in her eyes again. She didn't try to hide them this time, she let them fall. Because they weren't tears of pain, but tears of realization, tears of healing, tears of being seen. That evening, she sat at the old community center piano after everyone left. She placed her hands on the keys slowly. Gently, like greeting an old friend, she took a deep breath and played. Not to impress anyone, not to prove anything, but to remind herself who she used to be. The soft notes filled the empty hall, and Maria felt something inside her open like a window after years of being locked. Day by day, she practiced in secret, each session helping her rebuild the confidence she had lost long ago. Adrian visited sometimes, offering small tips but never pushing too hard. He understood she needed to grow at her own pace. The more she played, the more she realized that the dream she thought had died was still alive, waiting quietly for her to return. Finally, the day of the concert arrived. Maria stood backstage, trembling, her heart beating wildly. She felt dizzy with fear, but also with something new, hope. Adrian stood beside her, giving her a reassuring nod. She stepped onto the stage slowly, the lights warm on her skin, the crowd quiet and expectant. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and let her fingers begin the story. And when the music filled the hall, rich and emotional, the audience felt it immediately. They felt her journey, her pain, her courage, her hope. When she finished, the room erupted into applause even louder than the first day. Maria stood up with tears on her cheeks. But this time they were tears of pride. She had taken the step she feared. And in doing so, she changed her life forever. Adrian joined her on stage, smiling proudly. And the audience saw not a maid, not a cleaner, but a woman who had risen from silence to music again. Maria finally understood something she had forgotten. Talent doesn't disappear. It waits, and dreams don't die. They sleep until you find the courage to wake them again.